Hey guys, Zizaran here. This is going to be an Ancestral Warchief guide using the Debeon's Dirge unique axe. And this is doable as both a Berserker or a Chieftain. And I managed to kill Shaper with this on Hardcore. Did it 3 times on a very low budget, less than 70 chaos, and yeah, it worked really well. The way this build started is that a viewer called Jelly said he had a Path of Building for Dirge build and wondered if I wanted to take a look at it. I was pretty happy with how it looked initially, and we continued optimizing it, put on a curse and a couple other things, and it ended up being a very enjoyable build. If you want my Path of Building profile open while watching this video, the account name is Zizaran, and the character is called Zizaran Dirger. I'll link the Path of Building in the description as well. For your bandit choices, I choose skill points for Berserker, and for Chieftain, I pick Illyra. The reason for this is that Berserker has infinite mana anyway, because every time you do a Warcry, you get mana and life. Chieftain doesn't get this though, so mana regen from Illyra is a really good stat, and the resist as well is really nice for gearing easier. Pantheon wise, I pick up the Soul of Lunaris for the fist reduction and movement speed, and upgrading the Pantheon to avoid projectiles that have chain is very strong. Minor God is Tukohama or Grithkul, depends on how much he stands still. The core unique in this build is obviously Debeon's Dirge, which is a very high elemental DPS two-handed axe. And even though this has been used by several streamers now, it's so common that you can still grab it cheap. It's a huge bonus for this build. The bottom roll is around 500 E DPS, and the top roll is slightly above 550 elemental damage. So be sure you click the E DPS stat in PoE trade so you can buy a higher rolled one. What makes this really strong is that the cold to fire conversion is very strong. And the cold to fire gem adds up to 29% of cold damage as extra fire damage. There's loads of physical nodes we can convert in the tree using cold steel. There's a couple of powerful nodes as well, like Lava Lash. Another thing that made this a very attractive choice for me early on was that Izaro's Turmoil was only 2 chaos. And while this has gone up in price, it's still fairly cheap. It's a very nice jewel because you can get up to 50% increased damage with the jewel, because you're using both the cold and the fire part. Brimstone is a surprisingly big damage boost and helps convert the remaining 50% of physical damage to cold. This means that all the damage is converted to fire, and while there isn't a huge physical component, it still gave me like 10k tooltip. Died Below is a huge damage boost to this build and has great synergy with Dirge and Berserker, because you want to use Warcries a lot. It's also really nice for group play because every time you shout, you buff your friends as well, giving them attack speed, movement speed, and cast speed. The last unique I recommend is the Wise Oak for penetrating resists. For this flask, you want to make sure that in your resist tab, the number to the right of fire resist is the highest. That's your uncapped one. Remember that because we're using Avatar of Fire, you can't deal anything else than fire damage. So flasks like Edziri's Promise will not do anything. On a belt, I picked up a Tri-Res Life belt with elemental damage. You could technically use Prism Weave for crazy damage as well. Boots, you just use rare ones, movement speed, life, resist, stuff like that. And if you have an open prefix, you can craft elemental damage. And the best enchant for boots is penetration if you haven't killed recently. On the rings and the amulet, you want to grab cold damage if you can, but both physical damage and fire damage to attacks will increase your damage as well. Elemental damage on rings is great, and if you can get an opal ring and craft it with an anger essence, you can end up with a ridiculous amount of damage just from your jewelry. I didn't use any of this, I just had like flat added cold. Chestplate, you can use Belly of the Beast or a random rare chest. What I did is that I bought a cheap 4 red 2 blue corrupted 6 link, and that's a habit I've gotten into for a lot of my builds. You can easily specifically search for the linked colors in PoE trade and pick up a very cheap 6 link. You just won't be able to recolor it except unless you have Varichi level 8. You could also use a 3 red, 2 blue, 1 green, and then you swap in Fire Pen for faster attacks without taking a big damage loss. Good rare jewels can actually be better than Turmoils, and they can have life on them as well, which is a big plus. If you watch my exclamation mark trade video, which I will link to in the description, you can learn how to set up a count trade and search for all the jewel stats in one trade. Like you can search for 8 or 10 different stats, and then you put on a count loop. So I'll link to that and explain it in the description. I'll also list a count trade for all the jewel stats that you can have in the description. And it's set to Harbinger Hardcore, so make sure that you change the elite to whatever you're playing on. And you can see that when I'm making this, it was like jewels, 3-star jewels for as cheap as 1 alchemy orb. Ascendancy wise on the Berserker, I went for Crave the Slaughter first, then I picked up Warbringer, then Rite of Ruin, and finally Aspect of Carnage. On the Chieftain, I pick up 2 Kohama first, and then Hinekora afterwards. If you go Berserker, you get insane damage, and the cooldown reduction on Warcries was actually amazing. It feels like you're popping an instant flask every 2 seconds, and it was a really good habit to get into. It made me have endurance charges up a lot, and it had a really good feel to it. You take quite a bit more damage though. You take 10% more damage taken, and you don't get Rite of Ruin's reduction, because when your totems kill something, it doesn't count as you, unless it's finished off with an ignite. Because we're using elemental focus on this build, you are actually never going to have that bonus. I primarily use this for killing the Shaper because of the amazing damage and hitting 350k per totem in Path of Building on a low budget. When you toggle the enemy as a boss, it goes down to around 200k per totem, and that's still a lot more than what I used with my Facebreaker with Steel Rings, so it's a very, very nice build for Shaper. If you go Chieftain, you can still get some nice damage bonuses from your Ascendancy, but it's not going to be anywhere near what a Berserker gets. You do, however, get Leech and Taunt from your totems, as well as that enemies near your totems will deal less damage. I did Uberlab solo on it around level 73, and it was really easy. Izaro was just focusing my totems, so it makes for a pretty good lab farmer. However, it was harder to get it to do Edziri early on because you need a little extra damage to insta the phases. So you'll have to end up dodging early on in this build. However, when you're like 75 to 80, it should be very, very easy to do Edziri with. Another nice thing for Edziri is that your totems are immune to fire damage. So they're not going to get killed by flame blasts, or they're actually completely reflect immune as well. While your Path of Building damage might be higher than a lot of builds, bosses resist elemental damage, so you do need a bit extra. I'm now going to list the gem setups and talk about them. Your main setup is Ancestral Warchief, linked with Elemental Focus, Cold to Fire, Elemental Damage with attacks, Concentrated Effect, and Fire Penetration. You swap in Conk Effect with Ink AoE for clearing, and the Fire Penetration can be swapped with faster attacks if you can't get the colors. You drop Fire Pen or faster attacks if you aren't 16th yet. I have a 5-link in the Dirge build, which is actually Sunder. Even though we don't deal any damage at all with this skill, it's really useful. I link Sunder with Curse on Hit, Flammability, and Fortify. I used faster attacks as well, but you could put in Culling Strike or Blind. It's a very useful utility to have, and it means that you don't have to Leap Sam into the middle of mobs to get Fortify. The other gems are Leap Sam, Fortify, Enduring Cry, and faster attacks in a 4-link. And another one is Herald of Ice, Anger, Increased Duration, and Val Haste. And finally, Cast when damage taken, Temporal Chains, Increased Duration, and Immortal Call. Base Run is a really nice skill to have as well. While it doesn't give you any damage for Warchief anymore, that's something they removed in 3.0, it's still really good for Edziri when she's just about to spawn. You can pop it right before and she won't target you and she'll target your totems instead. And you can also use it for Shaper as well, and the balls that are floating about will not always go for you while Face Run is active. So you want to level it up if you can. It's pretty hard to get enough decks on this build, and if you can make it with increased duration, that's not bad either. For leveling this build, you can take a look at my speed leveling guide, and I'll link to that in the description. But TLDR, I just used Sunder and a Warchief for a pretty cookie cutter leveling experience. I changed to Dirge at level 66, and that's when I put in the Cold Steel Jewel, Double Totem, and Avatar of Fire. There's a lot of other options as well for Warchief, and a lot of you will be familiar with Facebreaker Warchief, and you can use things like Starforge or Disfavor as well. For Dirge versus Facebreaker, the thing I like more about Facebreaker is that I can shield charge. However, to do Shaper on Facebreaker, I had to use Abysses and Steel Rings, so it's very risky and pricier. On the Dirge build, I didn't need anything expensive, and I still had the option of using Opal Rings for an insane damage boost if I wanted it. Facebreakers do have the benefit of being mostly physical damage, so bosses don't resist as much of it damage, but even with the resist, my Dirge build was cheaper and had over double the tooltip of the Facebreaker version that I killed the Shaper with. As for more expensive things like Starforge, they're physical damage, so it isn't resisted, and on top of that, it can scale way higher. However, it's going to be tons more expensive. If you put 700 chaos into our Dirge build, you're going to be beating somebody who only has a Starforge and no other nice equipment. But if you're really like pouring 1000 plus chaos into a Starforge build, you're going to come out ahead on damage. But it's nice to have a lot of viable options for this build, because that makes them cheaper when everybody is not forced to do the same thing. As a final note, I'm very happy with how the build turned out. I managed to kill Shaper and I farmed a lot of Aziri with it. The second Shaper kill especially was crazy smooth and I enjoyed doing it a lot. If you're wondering why the build ended up dying, it was because Leap Slam is a big drawback for doing Shaper, so you have such a small room for error when he slams. In the end, what ended up killing me was that he targeted my totem instead of me. It was very hard for me to notice fast enough, so basically I fucked up and died when I couldn't do my Leap Slam properly. This is probably the most detailed guide I've done in a while, so let me know if you guys like it in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. Check me out on twitch.tv/Zizaran, and let me know if you have any questions. And guys, try to die less than I do.